Hello Corvids, welcome. On this fine Hallow's Eve, allow us to talk about one of the most common horror conventions, the horror idiot. The horror idiot, otherwise known as the main characters. They're characters that make illogical choices, lack observation, and common sense. So many movies include this trope. Some include I Know What You Did Last Summer and Friday the 13th, both classics that I've never watched and probably will never watch because I know the plot just from the trailers. But why is this trope so common? From what I found, it's to maintain excitement in the story, which tells me one thing as someone who's watched both Get Out and Us and knows that horror movies can be exciting with smart characters. The stories must fundamentally be weak. Something I've learned from every single art form I've learned is that if your fundamentals are weak, no matter how good you are at the details, your work will never be the best it can. For example, in art, there's a thing where if your base colors are weak, to say don't go well together, don't have enough contrast, no matter how much you render it, if your base colors aren't good, it won't look finished or as good as it could. Same in writing. If your premise or core story isn't interesting, no matter how much action you put into it or good description or imagery or anything, it can't be as interesting as it could be. Which tells me another thing about horror movies. They rely entirely too much on chalk and not enough on, good writing. Tyler Mowry does a great job explaining why movies like The Purge aren't that good. Well, subjectively. It is a really good video and you should watch it after you watch this one. One of the core elements in screenwriting, as Tyler Mowry always says, is strong philosophical conflict. This is true for pretty much all types of creative writing. A lot of horror movies I found have lacked that conflict. It's about the action and the drama and not about the story. That is why so many horror movie characters are dumb, because they have to be for the story to be interesting to the general public. As an avid enjoyer of horror and a horror writer myself, I know there are many types of horror. And that foolish characters are not the only way for a story to stay interesting. So please, please, please stop using the horror idiot. It's frustrating and overused. But what I've been talking about is classical horror, if you could call it that. Mostly slashers and monster type horror. There are lots of great horror movies out there like Perfect Blue and pretty much anything by Junji Ito. Well, Junji Ito didn't make movies, but you get my point. But then again, those are not American horror. Japanese horror is generally considered to be scarier than American horror. I don't watch horror films in general, so I can't be sure why that is, but I'm certain part of it is that there's less restrictions on Japanese television than there is in America. Thus, there can be more gore and general horror in films. I think part of it might be that there is a level of conflict that is interesting within the stories, but I think part of it is the lack of expectations for what a horror film is. There is a looser definition as to what a horror film is and needs to be, and thus it is simply a lot stronger. My point is only proven by this article by the Screen Rant, saying that horror movies rely heavily on archetypes and tropes to function in the way they do. That they, in my interpretation, rely on shock factor and empathy to create a sense of dread, fear, and horror. Similar to those cheap romance novels, it is another genre that relies heavily on tropes and expectations of the audience to be enjoyed and for the audience to form a connection with the characters. I'm not saying all things in those two genres, horror and romance, are poorly written. However, many are because it's easy. It's really easy to just follow the template and conventions set in place, because why build complex characters when there are these stock characters already there for you? I'll tell you why. And this is going to sound really obnoxious, but look at Kafka's Metamorphosis. It's a tragedy, but in some ways it's also a horror. A well-written one. It doesn't depend on chalk horror. In fact, the entirety of the book is delivered calmly in the way that I read it. Certainly Kafka is not American, but examples of good horror writing that I have given just show that horror has so much untapped potential and can be so much more than it is. I hope you enjoyed this little Halloween special and know that I will try my best to make more of these kind of videos, kind of doing little studies of different aspects of literature and art. If you enjoyed this content, please comment and like down below so that I know whether or not I should make more of this content. Of course, I am open to criticisms and willing to discuss and talk and have discussions about this topic with others. It's actually very fun for me to see your comments and to see what you guys think, so yes. I hope you have a happy Hallow's Eve and a wonderful evening. Goodbye, Corvids.